Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host today, and today we're going to be talking about the epic failure of sustainability programs in the cocoa sector. And before we get on to today's episode, a couple of reminders. The first one of which is that no matter where you are in the world, if you're watching today, you can go into the live chat on YouTube or the comments in LinkedIn and Facebook and let me know what you're thinking. You can tell me where in the world you're connected from, or if you have a question or a comment on anything that I say today, you can get that out there. This is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. And you can go there because this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by and supported by the members of the Chocolate Life. If you're not currently a member, you can go click on the join button up here in the upper right-hand corner, click on the join button and become a free member or a premium member. There's always been a pre-membership in the Chocolate Life since we started in 2008, and premium membership provides me the resources to be able to go and continue the work that it is that I'm doing here. And I want to thank all of the premium members and all the free members who make this work possible. And before we begin, I am going to go and show you this QR code. So the QR code in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, you can scan it with your phone and you can open up this page, which I'm going to be sharing with you right now. For every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together a post. And so here on the home page, we have the post in the top rail for the post for today's episode on the epic failure of cocoa sustainability initiatives. And the question is why? And so you can scan the QR code that you're currently seeing on the screen, and you can open up this page on your phone and follow along before, during, or after. And I appreciate everybody who does and goes and does that thing. So let's get started. Why don't we? Let me zoom this up a little bit. So this episode of Pod Save Chocolate builds on a couple of previous episodes. So I've talked specifically about the International Cocoa Initiative and their report, which, among other things, recommending that one way to address illegal child labor in the cocoa supply chain in West Africa is more monitoring. And then last week, I did have this post on the new ARS 1000 standard for sustainable cocoa in West Africa. And the idea that why do we need more bureaucracy? That adding more bureaucracy on top of existing bureaucracy is not a way to address the issues associated with sustainability. And there was an interesting comment from a watcher on LinkedIn that got me very curious to talk about this in a little more depth. The comment, which I don't know that I actually put the text of the comment in today's episode or a link to the LinkedIn post, which I will do after I get done here. But it caused me to think about, in part, my motivations, and really to think about what it was that I was thinking about. And I've had some correspondence with some people that are involved in farmer-related issues in the cocoa sector in West Africa, who are located in Switzerland. So this is a chance to go think about all those things. So here's the link to the previous episode. I'm on ARS 1000. Here's the link to the episode on the International Cocoa Initiative report. And where I want to start off with, and this is something that I did mention in the last episode, is I wondered where in the ARS 1000 report they talked about sustainability. And they do mention a very, very specific definition for sustainability, which is called Brundtland. And the Brundtland report is part of a UN sponsored initiative, is called Our Common Future. And there is a link to download the Brundtland report. You can go to the Brundtland report, you can download it. And there's also a fairly long description of sustainability and what is meant in Brundtland under at the International Institute for Sustainable Development page, and which is linked to. So you can click here, and it will take you to the International IISD page on sustainable development, where they talk to Our Common Future, the Brundtland report, and they give the definition, which under ARS 1000, under Brundtland, is Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. That's it. And it's a very, very broad definition. And the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, are sort of rooted in this definition of what it means to be sustainable. But let's talk about what the fundamental flaw is in the Brundtland definition of sustainability. And I'm going to go back to the framework that I put together now more than 5 years ago on how I define what sustainability means. And every time I have this conversation, I put this up there, I refer to it so that people know when I use the word sustainable, this is what I mean, right? And the first one is that I think that there are at least 4, but these are the 4 metrics that I use when I want to talk about what sustainability means. And the first one is environmental sustainability, right? And this element is explicitly acknowledged in the Brundtland definition. So we're going to manage our resources, right, today so that they can be used by future generations without compromise might be one way to think about it. But the way I think about environmental sustainability is what you're doing is you're managing the farm and its dependent, right, and supporting ecosystems in a way that, right, 100 years from now, they're still viable. So it says the same thing, right? But I think it's a little more specific. So we're going to manage the farm, we're going to manage the supporting ecosystems and the dependent ecosystems, right? So that they're healthy and thriving in 100 years. And I chose 100 years because it's what, 2.5 generations or something like that. And so it makes a little sense. And as I said, this environmental sustainability is explicitly acknowledged in Brundtland. Okay. So as a part of the definition for sustainability, it's not just environmental sustainability, but economic sustainability. And what I mean by economic sustainability, right, is that there's enough money at the farm level, right, so that the farmer, right, can live, right, can live I don't want to use the word dignified, but that is often the language that is used in these kinds of reports. But the farmer has enough money so that they can live comfortably, right? And that they can afford to be able to manage their farm to meet the environmental sustainability goals. So one of the challenges that I have with living income reference price and living income differential and all of this kind of stuff is that it doesn't really carve out a place, right, in the discussion for the money that the farmer requires in order to be able to maintain, and not just maintain, but improve their farms. So it talks about, do I have enough money that I can live on? Do I have access to water? Do I have access to food? Do I have access to education? Do I have access to healthcare? It talks about those things, but it really doesn't talk about the resources necessary to maintain and improve the farm. And so economic sustainability, which is implied under Brundtland, but is not explicitly discussed under Brundtland, right? Economic sustainability is implied, right? Has got to include this component of not just living income, which is based on farmer having enough money to take care of their families, right? But it also needs to include enough money for the farmer to be able to maintain and improve their farms. And I don't know that this is necessarily explicitly discussed in most of the platforms that are built on top of Brundtland. The third one is social sustainability, right? And again, it's vaguely implied under Brundtland, but I think it needs to be explicitly applied, which is that farmers and their families live in communities, right? And these communities need to be healthy and thriving, right, in 100 years, right? So if there is environmental sustainability, maybe there's economic sustainability, but there's not social sustainability. I mean, we haven't really met the demands under Brundtland. So I need to, in my view, explicitly talking about social sustainability, right, is an important aspect of this. So farmers live in communities. Those communities need to be healthy and thriving in 100 years. They may be organized into a cooperative. They may not be organized into a cooperative. The farmer may or may not be a part of a cooperative, and neighbors may or may not be involved in the cooperative. But irrespective, the farmers don't generally live by themselves, and they require supportive communities. And this is a really important aspect of that social sustainability. And social sustainability means, access to a water supply, access to transportation, access to all sorts of access to schools, right? That's part of social sustainability, right? And then finally, we need to have what I call market sustainability. And this is the element which is, I believe, ignored. I don't think it's implied. I don't think it's part of the thinking within the concept of Brundtland, right? Which is we need market sustainability. What that means is we need people who are willing to pay, right, to be able to support the environmental, economic, and social sustainability issues at the farm level, right? That's really important. If we don't have markets that are willing to pay higher prices to be able to support the environmental, economic, and social sustainability issues, we have a problem, just a fundamental problem. And one of the challenges that I have with all of this, all of the definition of Brundtland, all of these sorts of sustainability programs, is there is no discussion about sustainable markets, right? There is no discussion about how do we pay for this stuff. And there's this implied economic imperialism associated with that, in the sense that the environmental, economic, and social sustainability issues appear to be limited or appear to be problems, right, in cocoa producing countries. And cocoa producing countries are often referred to as developing countries or third world countries, right, or countries in the global south. And all of those terms, developing as opposed to developed, third world as opposed to first world, global south as opposed to global north, all of those terms are in fact imperialist, right? Here we are up in North America, we're in Europe, right? And what we're doing is we're using words that elevate us, that literally put us above, put us north first rather than third, developed rather than developing, that they privilege us, irrespective of my age, my skin color, or anything like that. Here we are in the consuming countries. And that's one of the reasons why I like the word consuming versus producing, because it doesn't have these connotations that developing versus developed, third world versus first world, and global south versus global north have, right? So that's why I want to do them. That's why I use them. And this is the important point here, right? Which is that the market sustainability issue is, in fact, an integral part of this, right? But what it does is it suggests that just focusing on the issues that are in producing countries is the wrong way. Saying that the problem is in a producing country, that's where it is in itself a form of economic imperialism. And if we, as the consumers, right, traders, processors, chocolate makers, confectioners, everybody, snack companies who use chocolate as ingredients, everybody who is right, has the money, right, to pay for these things, if we're not going to recognize culpability and responsibility, then we have a problem here, right? And this is the fundamental problem when it comes to cocoa sustainability programs or sustainability programs more general, is that the people are fair trade, right? All of these companies, they don't really focus on who is going to pay in order to be able to deliver the environmental, economic, and social sustainability requirements, right, that we all want. right? And as an exercise, just for fun, what I do is I suggest, if whenever you're watching this, is go take a look at the 17 SDGs. I don't have a link to them. I should probably put a link to the UN SDGs here. Go take a look at the UN SDGs and organize them into these 4 categories. Right, and find out, okay, how life on land, life in the sea, life in the air, how do all these things fit into these categories? And what you'll find is that basically the 17 UN SDGs fit into 3 or 4, the 3 of these 4 categories quite easily. You can take all 17 and lump them into 3 basic concepts. So let's put a pin in things there and give a quick shout out to Keith Ayub. Keith is a regular contributor to the Chocolate Life. He's in New York City. And today, resustainability. There are almost 2 pillars with different issues: large-scale sustainable cocoa and small-scale sustainable cocoa. The issues for each seem to have different challenges. To which I would say, focusing on scale, Keith, I mean, I understand where it is you're coming from, but what I want to suggest is, if we look at these 3 pillars, environmental, economic, and social sustainability, right? And then market sustainability, what we can do is we can classify what I think that you're talking about with respect to large scale and small scale. And this rubric of 4 different elements, I think covers your different issues. But if you can point out to me what you think are different issues for large scale sustainability and small scale sustainability, where you think that the issues are different between those 2 and don't fit within this rubric, I would be interested in knowing. So please let me know how you think about that, because I think the issues are the same, whether you're so small scale or large scale. In the first 3, we still need to have what I think of as environmental sustainability. So the farms they're supporting and their dependent ecosystems must be managed so that they're healthy and thriving 100 years from now. Economic sustainability is the farmer needs to have enough to support himself and his family, or herself and her family, right? And, with respect to food security, water security, access to education, and access to healthcare, though all of those things need to be a part of it. But also, we need to think about, okay, how much money is there in order to be able to maintain and improve my farm? And the differences, quote unquote, between large scale and small scale are the amounts of money that we're talking about. But maybe not. I don't know the answer to that question. Social sustainability, whether I'm a farmer who belongs to a cooperative, or I'm an individual smallholder farmer, I still live in a community, right? And that community needs to be healthy and thriving. So we need access to transportation. Maybe, is it town water? What are the resources, right? Is the school a community school? Those sorts of things. So I think that the difference is this market sustainability issue, which is who's paying for it and how widely can we distribute the costs. I don't necessarily know that the issues in the first 3 elements here are different in any meaningful way. But please let me know if I'm understanding or misunderstanding what you're thinking here, Keith. I would be interested in knowing your thoughts there. Or if you're watching this, what are your thoughts? I mean, are there meaningful differences between large scale and small scale when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to this rubric of four elements that I put together? So the first 3 elements can be seen as problems unique to producing countries. The 4th point recognizes that is the consumers of cocoa. Again, as I mentioned, traders, processors, makers, candy snack companies, confectioners, and members of the general public who ultimately pay for everything, right? And so that is the fundamental challenge here. So any discussion, right, of sustainable development that does not explicitly acknowledge and set forth the mechanisms to pay for sustainability in a way that the market will pay for is doomed to fail and can be viewed implicitly as a form of modern economic imperialism. So what is that all about? So let's take a look at the EUDR. as a case study in the notion of sustainability. So the EUDR has a larger goal of ending deforestation. At least that is the publicly stated objective. There are indications that there are groups of people who are profiting handsomely from the EUDR, even as it's entirely in disarray, and that there might be some lobbying behind the scenes for the EUDR that have nothing to do with sustainable development and deforestation directly. And I will get to that aspect of things in a future episode. I'm doing a little bit more research there to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting cases that are being made, but there are some implications there. So one fundamental flaw of the EUDR is that it sets forth a regulatory framework. So it sets forth the regulatory framework without proposing a corresponding economic framework. So the regulatory framework imposes costs, a lot of burdensome costs, and most of those burdensome costs are in producing countries. Now, one of the reasons why the EUDR is being delayed is because the cost of the computing systems which are necessary to manage compliance are really, really expensive and really, really complex. And it turns out that the EU member states didn't do a good job of figuring out how much it was going to cost them, right? But the costs of compliance, both at the farm level and at the government level, were really not considered. Where is the money going to come from to pay for these things? So it's a regulatory framework without an economic framework. So, all right. So, and all of the costs and all of the activities associated with EUDR compliance are taxes on the system that raise prices. That's no way around it, right? Anything that might end up in the EU has got to be EUDR compliant if it's cocoa or timber or soy or one of the 7 covered agricultural commodities, right? And so because the EUDR regulations were imposed by a consortium of consuming countries on producing countries, they're a form of environmental, economic, and social imperialism because they don't include this economic component that says, hey, we up here in the quote unquote global north have this idea that we want people down there in the global south, we want you to do this, but we're not going to pay for it. Or we haven't figured out a way to pay for it. It's just a complete washing of the hands of responsibility, right? And to some extent, to the extent that it makes sense, is because regulators only know how to regulate, right? Bureaucrats only know how to bureaucrat. They have one tool, regulation. So every problem can be solved with regulations, and regulations are not the solution to sustainability. So Keith asked, does a huge commodity farmer in West Africa even care about a small farmer in Peru who cannot afford equipment or technology? So number one, I don't know that there are many huge commodity cocoa farms in West Africa. There's more likely to be huge commodity farms in Peru, in Nicaragua, places where people have bought up huge tracts of land. I know some in Ecuador where they're growing CCN 51, right? I've seen more large commodity farms actually in the Americas than I've heard of in West Africa. So there is that. All right. But so the answer to the question is a commodity farmer in West Africa, do they care about a small farmer in Peru? The commodity farmer in West Africa in Nigeria doesn't care about the commodity farmer in Ghana, right? Or the smallholder farmer in Ghana. So I don't think that characterizing, one type of farmer in West Africa versus another type of farmer in Peru makes sense, because does the farmer in Peru care about the farmer in Ecuador? The answer is absolutely not, right? Except to the extent that what they're doing might have an impact on the farm gate price. And this is what we're talking about. What is the impact of these things on the farm gate price, right? So in general, there's not a whole lot that can be automated when it comes to farms, right? When it comes to cocoa farming, there's no automated tree picking. There's not a whole lot, right? And sort of ironically, a lot of the automation that is being built, like cocoa pod crackers and things like that, is being done in the Americas. It's not being introduced into small farms in West Africa. I mean, so in that respect, Keith, I don't know that I can make that afford equipment or technology that a large farmer can. And I would argue that there are more large farms in the Americas than there are in West Africa, right? If anybody knows any different, please let me know, and I will go and do some research on this. But that is my sense from talking to people, that there are more large farms, estate farms in the Americas, and perhaps in Indonesia and Malaysia and places like that than there are in West Africa, which has relied, which has relied on individual smallholder farmers. The entire industry does, but particularly in West Africa. Just wondering, a small farmer cannot afford to upgrade their farm to reduce losses. Perhaps a small scale farmer is able to devote more attention and resources to sustainable than a farmer. And the answer is yes. All right. So one of the reasons for big companies getting involved in cocoa agriculture is that they believe that by modern planting systems and things like that, what they can do is they can increase productivity. And I think the best example of that I've seen in person would be the Hacienda Victoria in Guayas in Ecuador, where they're working with very highly technified farming. So they're working with drip irrigation. They've developed tools which will help them understand how much to irrigate, if they're over irrigating, if they're under irrigating. They're introducing nutrients in the drip irrigation water. They are working on carbon neutral or carbon negative farming techniques, and it does require a lot of money in order to be able to do that. And what they've been able to do is they've been able to take an average production of somewhere between 600 and 800 kilograms per hectare and get it up to between 2 and 3 metric tons, 2,000, 3,000 kilos per hectare. So they're able to do that, and it does require a lot of money, and the return on investment turns out to be positive. So they can make these, and not everybody has the money in order to be able to do this, but they aren't mechanizing the harvesting. That still requires people to go through with machetes. They can't mechanize the pruning. That still requires people to go through and prune by hand. There's no automation of that. What they're experimenting with different farming systems, so different planting densities and different planting designs to be able to maximize the return per hectare, right? And do things like increase the nutrient content of the soil at the same time, and then draw down carbon at the same time. So that's what they're able to do, right? But the small farmer is able, so a large scale farmer, and by that I want to say an estate holder farmer. So this is a company or a family that owns a large amount of land and they're hiring labor, right? And that's the way the business is run, all right? Perhaps a small scale farmer is able to devote more attention and resources to sustainable. Again, in what you mean by sustainable, right? So if we go back to this rubric here, environmental sustainability. So from the point of view of Hacienda Victoria, this environmental sustainability, absolutely, right? What they're doing is they're managing the farm in the way they're using less water. They're reducing the cost of fertilization. They're increasing the income, right? Economic sustainability, the workers are hired labor. And so they have very different requirements from a smallholder farmer. So yeah, and it turns out that the owners of the Hacienda Victoria, the ones that I spoke with, are actually very concerned about making sure that the workers who work for them actually live in supportive communities, but that's not a requirement, right? So let's go there. And market sustainability, it turns out that the estate holder is assuming all of the economic risk, right? And the upside and downside is 100% theirs, unless there is a profit sharing program that they put together with their workers, which doesn't happen. But still, this is an important thing when we come to it, is that the estate holder has assumed 100% of the economic risk, right? They're the ones who are investing in it. They're the ones, and that their laborers are hired. The workers are hired, and there are requirements in Ecuador for minimum wage and benefits and all this other kind of stuff. That may not exist in West Africa, right? But there are regulations in Ecuador about those sorts of things, as well as in Brazil. So the answer is yes, right? But none of the sustainability standards, none of the sustainability initiatives, right, cover these things. This is the work of an individual family who has the resources, both the land and other financial resources, to be able to invest in this way. And it's not because there is some sustainability program, right, that is requiring them to. There's not some certification that they're doing in order to get in order to be able to do this. I mean, if I can leave it there. So I didn't know that there were that many huge commodity farms in the West permitted. I don't know that when we talk about huge, right, we need to go there. So the average smallholder farm is under 5 hectares, under 10 acres, and in some cases it's closer to 2 to 4, right? So we're talking about something which is relatively small, right? In terms of the Hacienda Victoria, it's, maybe 300 hectares. It's not huge, right? In terms of, there are, 2,000, 3,000 hectare soybean farms in Brazil. We don't have, when I think about huge, I think about, in the United States, I think about Kansas. I think about, corn going for miles and miles and miles and miles, right? So huge is relative terms. A huge cocoa farm might be 50 hectares, 100 hectares, whereas the standard farm is less than 5. So we need to define huge compared with what in this particular case. And certainly soybeans in particular, right, for example, are much larger. Soybean farms can be much larger and can be very highly mechanized as well. So I totally agree about regulators, good on policy. I don't know necessarily that they're good on policy. I mean, the whole EUDR program, it appears to be regressive to me. It has an interesting idea, which is how do we go about and deforest? How do we go about and combat deforestation? But what it does is it sets up, unfortunately, incentives to be able to game the system, right? And we have yet to see what the unintended consequences of the EUDR are going to be with smuggling and other kinds of stuff like that. Believe it or not, it turns out that only a very small percentage of a very small percentage of cocoa that enters the EU is ever going to be screened for compliance. I mean, it's really quite remarkable how little will be screened for compliance and what the penalties are for being out of compliance. And where are the costs associated with that? Where are the costs associated with implement? And and the important thing is that none of the money, right, which goes to ensure EUDR compliance ever makes its way back to the farmer, right? All of the costs are incurred by people upstream, right? And they're the ones who get paid for their services, irrespective of whether the cocoa sells or anything like that. The satellite surveillance companies, they get paid no matter what, right? The certifiers, the people who are responsible for signing off, they get paid no matter what, right? None of the money in the system actually goes to ensure that the farmers are compensated properly, that the farmers are given the money that they need to be able to improve their farms, to manage their farms properly. They're not given, there's no thought to, oh my gosh, there's all this extra labor. How do they get paid for all the extra labor associated with making sure all the paperwork is taken care of? There's none of that, right? And the market has said, do we want to spend an extra $100, $200, $300, per metric ton for EUDR compliance on top of record high prices for cocoa? The market has said, oh my gosh, that's asking a lot, right? And so this is, I think, one of the fundamental challenges when it comes to regulatory approaches. And this is one of the reasons why the UTR is perhaps an interesting idea, But because, right, it's a regulatory framework with no corresponding economic framework, they didn't think about who's going to pay for this stuff. They don't care. They're governments. We get paid no matter what. I'm an EU commissioner. I'm going to receive my salary, and no matter what. And I can feel like I did good things for the environment and good things for farmers. But does this actually improve the lives and livelihoods of farmers? And of course, all of this is completely separate from issues associated with the living income reference price and the living income differential and other things, which are, again, forms of economic imperialism. People have decided this is what the living income in this place is. And as long as we can make sure that these people make the minimum living income, that we've washed our hands, we've solved the problem. And that's not, in fact, the case. All right. So here is where I want to take the conversation for the rest of this episode. And then I'm not going to answer all of these things this episode. There's going to be an episode a week from today, which I'm going to be giving more answers. So I've said, okay, we have a challenge here, which is that if we're going to develop any kind of regulatory framework, and so this includes a de jure regulatory framework, okay, so a legal framework, right, which is put together by a government. And this is an example of the UDR. UDR is a regulatory framework, which is a de jure regulatory framework. And then we have what I'm going to call a de facto regulatory framework. And this is where fair trade, rainforest alliance, organic certification, quote unquote, regenerative agriculture certification, all of these certifications are sort of in the de jure regulatory framework. These frameworks don't address the fundamental problem of how do we make sure that the farmers are adequately compensated for the work that they're doing. So, for example, one of the reasons why I refer to fair trade certification specifically is that there is no guarantee by the certifying body, FLO Fair Trade, right, or Fair Trade USA, or any one of these quote unquote fair trade certifying bodies, whether it is the labeling organization or the actual institutes that do the certification, because for some reason they need to be separate, right? Is that they do not guarantee to purchase 100% of the product that is certified at the fair trade price. Right? So let's say that the price of cocoa was, $2,000 a ton. The fair trade premium was $250, and so they're going to pay $2,500 a metric ton for 100% of the cocoa that is produced, no matter what. And then it would be their responsibility to find buyers for it. Right? What happens is, however, is that the fair trade organization says, we want you to pay for the privilege of being certified. So you're going to pay to do all of the framework. You're going to pay to do all of the work that is necessary to be in compliant with our regulations. And then you're responsible for selling it. And if you can't sell 100% of what you produce at the certified price, you sell it at the conventional price, then you have to make up the difference. So if you can't sell enough cocoa at the certified price to cover the cost of certifications, you're SOL. We're not going to do anything about that. Yeah, we're going to help market the idea of fair trade, and people are going to do that. And, but the fair trade organization, it's making money no matter what. It collects the licensing fees from the cooperatives so that the cooperative can be branded fair trade. The agency that is actually doing the on-the-ground certification, they get paid no matter what. Right? The company that is buying the cocoa, and they want to be a licensed fair trade certified organization so that they can buy the cocoa as fair trade and sell the cocoa as fair trade. So they're paying a licensing fee so they can put the fair trade logo, right, on things. They're paying, right? The chocolate maker or a processor who's buying this, they pay, and no matter what. So the licensing organization makes their money no matter what. Right? And the farmer is the only one without any guarantee of actually getting paid. And that is, a fact, a de facto form of economic imperialism. There's no way about it, because these organizations are not taking any of the market risk. In the end, the retailer is taking some of the market risk, because if they can't sell the product on time, right, then they have to, if it goes by the best by date, they can't sell it anymore. But their margins make sure that they're, for the most part, not going to take a loss in anything, right? And the farmer isn't participating in any way, except for some individuals. Keith, at this point, what we can do is we can talk about somebody like Sean Eskenazi. So what Sean Eskenazi says, I'm going to pay a certain price. It's going to be the fair trade price, right? Minimum at the farm gate when I purchase it. And then I'm going to give you 10% of the gross profits on everything that I sell. And so he comes back and sells he gives back and returns part of the upstream, right, value add that he has made. And he's assuming the market risk here in order to be able to do that. The farmer just gets a bonus check every year. But this is an example, right, as I would say with the Hacienda Victoria in Ecuador, where an individual or a family has made a business, right, has made a decision this way, right, to improve the lives and livelihoods of the farmers. And somebody like Eskenazi says, oh, does the community that I work with need a school? Let's help them build this. Do they need a well? Let's help them build this. Do they need a school lunch program? Let's figure out a way to finance a school lunch program, right? And so these are ways to address especially the social sustainability and the economic sustainability issues associated with being a cocoa farmer, right, in interesting and different ways. And this is the segue, thank you, Keith, to this next section. So we're all familiar with this. I hope we all are familiar with this notion that you got to think outside the box, right? Whatever that means. What does thinking outside the box mean, right? And Deepak Chopra, who's generally somebody who I think is a little woo-woo in a mystical kind of way, and I don't buy a lot of what it is that he has to say in his quantum healing and other kinds of things like that. But he did have this interesting idea, which is not enough to think outside the box. You need to throw the box away, right? And that's okay, but if you throw the box away, you're still thinking about the box, right? You're still thinking about the box. You've thrown it away, right? But maybe there are other boxes around, right? And so what I've done is I've said, okay, let's change that notion. It's not enough to think outside the box. It's not enough to throw the box away. But in order to be truly innovative, what you have to do is you have to forget entirely what boxes are. And the way I think about that, right, is that you need to go in and constantly challenge your presuppositions. You need to go, am I presupposing something about the situation, right? And if I am presupposing something about the situation, I need to throw that away, right? I need to be constantly reevaluating my assumptions, my presuppositions, the systems that exist in order to be able to find out, oh my gosh, is there something that I can do in order to be able to solve this problem in an innovative way, right? Can I solve the problem using laws, using regulations? Well, maybe I can solve them, right? But if all you're doing is you're putting together a regulatory framework without an economic framework, the answer is no. And if you put together an economic framework that the market won't recognize, and this is one of the things where we find the living income differential, right? Is there have been some big companies that say, I just refuse to pay it. So even though there are these quote unquote regulations around the lid, right? A company can say, I just don't want to pay it. And where does that leave the farmer, right? I mean, right? When we look at the way the fair trade premium is negotiated, it turns out that big chocolate companies are in the same room with the farmers, right? And then you have the notion, well, I'm not going to have a higher fair trade premium in one country, 11 cents a kilo as opposed to 10 cents a kilo. The country that's got this 11 cents a kilo is going to say, I don't want that because it's going to make my cocoa more expensive and people are going to prefer buying it from someplace else. So the way right, the fair trade premium is negotiated puts negative price pressure on things, right? We've seen, cocoa bod has, and in Ghana and the Ivory Coast, they've raised prices, farm gate prices considerably, but really slowly compared to what the market has been doing. And then it's at a certain point right now. But if the market floats down, will the farm gate price of cocoa also go down? And that seems to me the market determining the farm gate price rather than the other way around, which means we've got, this is just the wrong way around it. We're never going to be able to support, right, the environmental, economic, and social sustainability requirements if the market doesn't support them. And that's, I think, is. And again, so, going here with around the boxes thing, I just really, really hit on this. If regulators think that the problem is in third world countries, aka developing nations, aka the global south, then the solutions to those problems belong in those places, not in first world countries, aka developed nations, aka the global north. The phrases are implicit environmental, economic, and social imperialism, right? So it is only by acknowledging and accepting market impact and risks that the scales can begin to be balanced, in my opinion, right? Without the actors in first world countries, without the actors in consuming countries, right? No real meaningful long-term progress can be made. And that requires accepting this economic responsibility for things. We got to figure out how this stuff is going to be paid for. So we have this certification industrial complex we talked about, fair trade, FLO Fair Trade USA, Rainforest Alliance /UTS is a part of this, the organic certification process, the new regenerative agriculture certification initiatives, right? The challenge is if the certifying bodies assume zero market risk, right? They do not guarantee that 100% of the products that are certified under their label are guaranteed to earn the premiums and benefits being paid for, right? They act as attackers on the system, they raise prices, and they do not deliver, right? This notion of sustainability. They can't, right? Because they're making promises to the farmer that the market is not going to buy into. And we need the market to buy into these things. We need people who are willing to pay for this, right? We can say it's fair trade. And I've said this before, who decides what's fair? And in this particular case, who decides what's fair, in the case of quote unquote fair trade, is in an NPC kind of way, white people in the global north telling brown people in the global south what's fair. And is it fair? And the answer is not really, right? Who decides what's fair? It's the people with the market power. They are the ultimate deciders, not the farmers. And so the farmers might have some input into it, but they have no control over the process. And I did talk about that in great detail in my series on the changing landscape of cocoa sourcing. And in part one, especially under the ethics as market category section, I talk about some of the issues here. What people are doing is they're outsourcing the morality, and you can't separate the morality of production from the morality of consumption. And this is one of the challenges with fair trade, especially as it comes to the economic promises that are being made. Perhaps the OG aspect of all of this is, in fact, the Harkin-Engel Protocol, right? It was signed in 2001. It was supposed to be a way to end all illegal forms or the worst forms of child labor in the cocoa sector in West Africa, specifically cocoa in West Africa, right? It was signed in 2001, right? And 23, 24 years later, the problems have not been resolved. And in some cases, people said they might be worse, right? And why? Because what happens is they put the very entities that created the problems in charge of solving them, right? Setting the stage for failure through self-dealing. There's been a huge amount of intransigence, so obstruction, deliberate obstruction on the part of Big Chocolate, right? To keep, among other things, legal challenges, right, out of the courts, to tie them up for years, right? To bring legal theories that these companies are willing to spend tens of millions of dollars in courts in the United States rather than taking those tens of millions of dollars, accepting responsibility and legal liability, which is the problem, right? They don't want to accept the legal liability for doing this, but they could take those millions and millions and millions of dollars that they're using to obstruct, right? Actually solve the problem and use them to solve the problem, right? And that's a big challenge, right? The big companies are incentivized to maximize the return to their shareholders. That is the purpose of a public corporation in many respects. And so their goal is to make sure that their input costs are as low as possible and their wholesale prices are as high as possible. I mean, they are actually doing what it is that they're legally required to do as a company, right? When they spend their money this way. And we need to ask ourselves, does that make sense, right? So I say it's a large part due to the intransigence of the signatories to Harkin Engel and the reluctance of politicians and judges to hold those signatories to account for the promises that they made. And so if you don't know, you can go take a look at the Harkin Engel protocol. There's the Wikipedia entry. I went looking for the Engel. I went to look in the congressional record, and all the links to these things for people who no longer sitting members of Congress are like broken. There's an enormous amount of link rot to try to find this stuff, but you can download a copy of the Harkin Engel protocol. Here's a link to doing it at the COCOA Initiative, the ICI website. And you'll see that it's signed by members of the Chocolate Manufacturers Association, Harkin Engel, and other congressmen, and witnessed by a director of the ILO. I mean, but this is 2001. And what substantive progress has been made? The answer is not a whole lot. And why not? Because the companies that are signatories to this and the politicians who bought into the we're going to let the fox rule the hen house. We're going to let them. It's just right. It doesn't work. Right. It's proven over and over again. I've had Terry Collingsworth, who's at the International Right Advocates, on the Chocolate Life a number of times, talking about the legal challenges that they've brought and the their successes and failures associated with these things. If you are interested in knowing more about what International Rights Advocates is doing, there's a link to their cases page, and you can go through that page and you can go and look at what they're doing in COCO, what they have done in COCO. So the way forward, and this is where I'm going to end today. We're almost at the end of the hour, right? So I'm not going to answer all those questions today. Number one, leaving myself 5 to 6 minutes to do that, right? There's no way that I'm going to be able to give enough shrift. It would be very definitely short shrift if I were to try to answer the question or give some ideas about how to solve these problems, right? But I'm going to do that a week from today. So on the Tuesday, November 18th episode, I'm going to be talking about what I think are some of the things that we can do. So ways forward, right? That need to be done, that small chocolate, so specialty chocolate makers, craft bean to bar chocolate makers around the world can do to start moving the needle, right? Because, right, what happens is, and this is the fundamental overarching aspect of this, is we need to think about chocolate first, not cocoa first. And that may sound counterintuitive. I am throwing the box away here. It is through the sales of chocolate that we will generate the dollars necessary to support everything we want to do on the ground, right? Everything we want to do at the farm level. If we don't sell enough chocolate at a high enough price, right, we will never generate the resources which are necessary in order to be able to effectuate systemic change. Now, small chocolate makers right now, only 5% of the market, roughly, specialty chocolate, roughly. And so the challenge is, how do we grow that 5% of the market in such a way that big chocolate has to pay attention, the governments have to pay attention? And some ideas for how to do that, right, are what I'm going to be talking about in the issue, or not the issue, but an episode a week from today. And that's it for this episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, at least for this topic, which is about the epic failures of cocoa sustainability initiatives. Why are cocoa sustainability initiatives failing? They're failing because they don't consider the cost, right? They don't factor in the market sustainability aspects of what they're doing. They're focusing solely on fixing a problem on the farm level, which they think only exists at the farm level, without addressing the issue of who the heck is going to pay for this stuff. They need sustainable markets in order to be able to cover the economic, environmental, and social sustainability requirements in order to get stuff done. And that's the précis. That's the conclusion for today. Now, this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. This is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. If you're not a member, you can click on the join button up here. There's always a free membership tier. There has been since the Chocolate Life was founded in 2008. But if you do have the resources to support me, beginning at $5 a month, then all that support is really, really welcome. Thank you very much to all of the premium subscribers to the Chocolate Life, especially my Team Guru members. So what's going to go on between this week, between today and this coming Tuesday? This coming Friday, which is the 14th of November, is going to be the monthly news and AMA episode. And if you are a member of the Chocolate Life, the monthly member newsletter is going out this week as well. So if you subscribe to the Chocolate Life today or before the end of the week, you will get the November monthly newsletter mailed to you, emailed to you. If you don't, you can sign in, right? When you become a member, you can sign in, and there is a list of all the member newsletter here below the top rail. And so I'm not signed in. So what happens is I will get an introduction, and it says this post is for subscribers only. When you signed in, you can see the entire post. So there's that. I hope that's cool. And we can figure out what's going there. And other things, the Midwest Craft Chocolate Festival is coming up. I'm going to be in Rushville, Indiana for that festival from the 19th through the 23rd. So I'm going to be leaving like next week. It's hard to imagine that it's that soon. And then I'm going to be traveling with family to be with family over the Thanksgiving. So I may miss the November all members call because I'm going to be in Rushville and not available on that day. And so there may be a couple of episodes of Pod Save Chocolate that also go by the wayside because I will be traveling. But in the meantime, I want to thank everybody for joining me here today. I want to thank, again, all of my members who make this possible, and close, as I close every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, which is, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you may just be doing it wrong. Until the next time, everyone, ciao.